Hey, all you musical Innertubers out there, we've said it before and we're saying it now. We'd love to hear from you.
And there are so many ways to contact us. For example, you can do what Tom Haywood did. Leave us a voicemail.
Your episode on Henry Mancini was just fantastic. Loved it. You should be very proud of that one. Keep up the good work.
It's easy to do. Just go to our webpage, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the orange microphone in the lower right corner of the page. Then, click on the orange bar that says Start Recording.
Also on our webpage, you can click on Contact at the top of the page to leave us a message.
Or on that same top bar, click on Rate the Tube and tell us what you thought about one or all of our shows.
And you can always send us an email at musicalinnertube@gmail.com.
We'd love to hear from you. As Tom Haywood says,
Talk to you soon.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Today on the Musical Innertube, we say hi again to our old friend, Mike Hingson. Mike attended the University of California, Irvine, graduating with honors and receiving a master's degree in physics. And despite all that academic prowess, he still chose to hang out with John and me during our time at KUCI, something I'm sure he hasn't forgiven himself for. He's also the best-selling author of Thunderdog, the true story of how he and his guide dog Roselle escaped from Tower 1 on 9/11. You may remember we talked to him about that on a previous episode. He's an internationally acclaimed public speaker, the Chief Vision Officer for Accessibee, a company that creates products to make websites more accessible to people with disabilities. And he's also the National Federation of the Blind's ambassador for its National Braille Literacy Campaign.
And just got inducted, by the way, at UC Irvine as an alumni member of Phi Beta Kappa.
Ooh, my goodness. Congratulations, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, John and I just got a letter saying if we ever come back to KUCI, they're going to sick the dogs on us. So that's where we are. We also have Keri Wyatt. She is the co-author of the book that we are talking about today that Mike has written with her, called Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. Keri is the author of 12 books and the co-author of 13 titles. She's the founder of A Powerful Story, a company that provides editing, collaborative writing, and ghostwriting, and assisted self-publishing services. And she's also the author of the Substack newsletter Welcoming and Wandering, which explores hospitality and travel as spiritual practices. So welcome to Michael. Welcome to Keri.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Mike, this is another one of your shameless biographies. We go through your life and find out what you've done, and it's connected to each of your guide dogs. How many guide dogs have you had so far in your life?
I am on number 8, Alamo. I got my first one in 1964, so it has now been 60 years for 8 dogs. So we're actually doing pretty well at getting over the statistical norm. That is, guide dogs usually work 6 to 8 years. And now we're up to an average of 8 years per dog. And I expect it to be higher because Alamo, whose current dog, is doing really well.
Great. How did the two of you get together, Keri, to write this book?
Well, as you know, you've interviewed Mike before for his best-selling book, Thunderdog, which was about his 9/11 experience with Roselle and getting out of the towers. He co-wrote that book with my friend, our mutual friend, Susie Flory. And Susie and I are, I call her my writing bestie. We're both writers. We both are collaborative writers. And she let me know that Mike wanted to do another book and contacted me she's working on a PhD, I guess it is now. And
right.
She was in grad school, and didn't have time to work with Mike on a book. So she entrusted that to me. And, I so that's, we met each other through Susie, started talking, and I was like, this is a great project. I'd be honored to be a part of it. So that's how we ended up together.
And we've been doing this now for pretty close to 3 years, and just on the 20th of August. So Live Like a Guide Dog was finally released to the public.
Quite a process. It was a lot of fun, though, but it took a while.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about the process a little bit. And by the way, I am also a freelance editor and writer. So it's lovely to see and welcome a sister in the art. And it's a fun job if you can hold on to it. And I wanted to ask, how did the idea come about? Did Michael have the idea before he spoke to you, or did it arise out of story conferences? Either one of you could talk about it.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, it kind of evolved. We actually kind of were looking at a couple of different ways of going with it. And it was sort of an evolutionary process and absolutely a collaborative process. And we had originally thought about having a book that would include other people's stories of their dogs and so on. But as it evolved and working with the publisher, Tyndale House, and so on, it just kind of moved to really being a lot more of the story of me and my guide dogs. The whole idea behind the start of the book was that I wanted to start to talk about helping people learn to control fear. When the pandemic began, I realized that I had talked for 20 years basically about getting out of the World Trade Center and being calm, but I had never really done anything to teach people how they could learn to control fear rather than letting fear, as I would put it, blind them or overwhelm them. Whenever something unexpected happens, especially something horrific, people just go into a panic. And the reality is you don't need to do that. You can learn to use fear as a very powerful tool to help. So that kind of was the basic premise of the book, but the way it got presented and so on evolved over time. Keri, you might want to add to that.
I think Thunderdog was about what happened to you and what you did. And this book, as it turned out, Mike's correct. There was a lot of evolution, a lot of collaboration, even with our editor at Tyndale, but it's the how. So Thunderdog was the what. Live Like a Guide Dog is the how to be brave, how to manage your fear, how not to let fear blind you, how to move forward in faith, those sort of things. And so it really it tells Mike's story, but that's sort of the narrative. But along the way, you get a lot of practical help with what are some things I can do to not be blinded by fear, to not let fear cause me to panic. Fear's a normal thing. And we say that in the book. It's a normal reaction that keeps us safe sometimes, but we can use our fear to live courageously.
You can use and learn to use your fear reaction in a very powerful way. And one of the way the book evolved, what we decided to do was to use examples that I learned from working with 8 guide dogs, plus Karen's service dog, my wife, who passed away 2 years ago, Fantasia. And we decided to use lessons that I learned from each of those dogs about fear and about life. We use those lessons to teach people about controlling fear. For example, one of the things that happened at the end of September 11th is we went home. And as soon as we got home, I took off Roselle's harness. I took her harness and removed it, was going to take her out. She would have none of it. She immediately just shot off, grabbed her favorite tug bone, and started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog, Linny. And the thing about that is that when I talked to the people at Guide Dogs for the Blind, they put it in perspective. They said, did anything threaten Roselle during the terrorist attacks? And I said, no, nothing directly threatened her. And they said, well, there you go. Because I had called to ask in part how this might affect her. And they said, well, since she wasn't threatened directly in any way, nothing affected her. When it was over, it was over. And we as people are always doing what if about everything. Dogs live in the moment. And that's a really important and powerful lesson to learn. We focus on trying to control everything that we see, hear, do, or think about, rather than recognizing that what we ought to do is just worry about the things that we can control and not worry about the rest, and stop trying to do so much what if. And if we learned to live more like a dog, we'd probably be a whole lot better and we'd have a whole lot more saner world. But that's one of the lessons we talk about in the book, this whole idea of doing what if in the right places, but not doing it everywhere, because all that's going to do is drive you crazy.
Right. It's a bit about mindfulness. There's a chapter on mindfulness, and that's sort of an example of that. Another thing was, when Mike was working at the World Trade Center, it's a big place, and it had actually an attack years before that was the smaller one. And so Mike, when working there, said, I need to know how to get out of the building. I need to know the emergency procedures. I need to know where everything is. So when he started working there, he went around and memorized sort of like where everything is. Where's the cafeteria? Where's the stairwell? Where's the emergency exit? He knew that. So that preparation is a strategy that if you prepare, you're less afraid. I mean, the military does this, if you prepare, when you face the unexpected, you've actually prepared for it and you're not as fearful. You're able to channel that fear energy into positive action. And so that's another strategy that we talk about in the book. It's just ways to not be scared.
People talk all the time about, how could you possibly train your dog to deal with what happened on September 11th? The response is you don't, but you train the dog how to not be distracted by things that go on around them. You train the dog to follow commands. You also train yourself to let the dog do its job as well. But it's all about preparation and training and knowledge, as opposed to worrying about reading signs and other things, which may not work if you are in a smoke-filled environment where you can't read the sign. Knowledge is always power.
In reading the book, I was going to mention the fact that you're always prepared, that you go out and you figure out the layout of the city where you're living in or the building that you're in, which is necessary for you in order to get around. But something else happens and you're able to work around it. And I'm thinking specifically of when you were in Boston and you're down on the street and you know the streets, but now you walk into a snowbank. Because the plows have thrown the snow back, which all of us deal with, sighted and unsighted, believe me. But you and your guide dog at the time had to find that opening that would get you past the snowbank and into the street. So again, it's a situation where, as well prepared as you can be, when something throws you a curveball, you've got to be able to roll with it and deal with it.
Well, the other part about it is, at first, I didn't even know that there was, that makes sense, of course, but I didn't even know there were openings, not knowing about snowbanks.
Yeah.
And then
sometimes they're not. Sometimes in some cities, you have to climb over the snowbank.
In some cities, there aren't any, yeah. But that was the whole point. And so then you learn to look for it.
And I think in that situation, that was when he first moved to Boston, and there was, snow, there was ice, there was all these things that he didn't know about. And so sometimes when we get scared, we shut down and we don't ask questions. We're like, oh no. And in that example in the book, Mike asked people, he was not afraid to ask passersby, hey, what's going on here? Or they offered to help and he accepted that help. It's okay to ask questions to get more information in whatever way possible.
Can you tell us a story, Michael, about, just to give an example of something that a guide dog did for you? Let's skip the really big one of the dog, the one that we always talk about on this show when you're on, which is, 9/11, which, by the way, is one of the great stories you'll ever read, folks. You should read that book of Michael's. But give us another example of a dog doing something that taught you about a way that you could change your attitude or some other living strategy.
So one example that comes to mind immediately is a few years after September 11th, I was now working partly at Guide Dogs for the Blind, and I was at the Oregon campus to speak to students and do some things. And I got there in the late afternoon and stayed at an apartment downtown in Boring, Oregon, and wanted to go out to dinner. And I had asked directions to a particular restaurant and followed the directions, got to the restaurant. But then when I was going home, for some reason, and I still to this day don't know why, in retracing my steps, we deviated somewhere and I didn't end up back at the apartment. And again, when we did it twice. So I was able to retrace my steps to the restaurant, but then I couldn't get back to the apartment. And I knew that what I had to do, though, was to not get nervous for the dog, because if I had just gotten all nervous and panicky and so on, poor Roselle's going to go, what's going on with you? And she's going to try to comfort me and so on. But it was my job to figure that out, because the job of a guide dog is to make sure we walk safely, not to know where we want to go. And people are always saying how the guide dog led you out of the World Trade Center, how the guide dog leads you. No, guide dogs don't lead, they guide. Their job is to make sure that we walk safely. My job is to know where to go and how to get there. What I finally did was I suddenly remembered I've got in my pocket and have access to GPS. And I actually used GPS to get back to the apartment. Was very primitive in the stages of making a talking GPS for blind people, but nevertheless, it was there. And I realized that, and I turned it back on, and we got back to the apartment, and everything was fine. But the point is that because I was working with a guide dog, and I had understood that I don't really dare panic, because then the dog's not going to know what to do. I have to focus as the team leader. I have to be the one to take that responsibility of getting us where we need to go from a command standpoint. And I was able to continue to do that. But it's a very personal story, because it really happened there. And it happens a lot where you go somewhere and maybe there's a surprise or whatever. But what you got to learn to do working with a guide dog, and I think that we all should learn a lot more, is how not to panic just because things don't go the way you want. But I had to be responsible for the dog and keeping the dog sane too.
There's a way that the book ties each of your different guide dogs into a particular idea or trait, I want to say, as far as being persistent or being courageous and that sort of thing. So between you and Keri, who had the idea to tie the guide dogs into those particular traits as you go through the book?
It was really a collaborative sort of effort. I think Mike, when we first started this, he had some like training materials. He was sort of in early development of that talked about various ways to not be blinded by fear. And they did include some of the strategies that we then like became the chapters, like perseverance, preparation, awareness, that sort of mindfulness, those sort of things. And so, you know, part of my coming in as a writer, and also the people at Tyndale were we had to find a structure, a way for people to like glom onto each of them. And we wanted to tell more about the dogs. And so each of those dogs actually fit with some of these things that we were wanting to share. Mike, how about you? What do you think?
Well, the reality is books about dogs are things that people like. And, but even so, it really was not a magical overnight, we're going to do it this way. It evolved because we had started learning some stories from other people and doing some other things. And Keri had talked to guide dog trainers. She talked to some people from other schools, Canine Companions for Independence, and a few other things like that. But just over time, it just evolved that this is probably the best way to go. And I think that it was the best way to go. We both kind of came to that realization and put it into practice. And I think it's worked out really well. But yeah, you're right. Every chapter is about another dog. So each dog did teach lessons, and that's what we try to bring out in each chapter. So the chapter on my third guide dog, Klondike, in part was interesting because one of the things that happened with Klonnie was that he developed this fear when we were going into San Francisco to do training while we were at Guide Dogs for the Blind. Like the third weekend, they would usually take us to San Francisco and we would walk around and have a chance to really work in very crowded city environments. Klondike developed this phobia one day and just was shaking and shivering and wouldn't leave the bus. And what the guide dog trainer said was just work with him, encourage him, and just do your best to work through it. And I said, well, maybe he needs to retire and not be a guide dog. And the trainer, Terry, said, no, just be patient. And what a powerful lesson, because I encouraged him and worked with him and just slowly, he got off the bus the first time it happened, slowly got off the bus the second time it happened, was a lot more comfortable the third time when we got off the bus, and by the fourth time, there was no fear or anything. He was fine again. Have no idea where it came from, but those things do occur. And the reality is that he was fine.
And I think Klondike teaches a great lesson, and Mike's handling of Klondike, to persevere, to be patient, to not beat yourself up. Like he didn't, get angry at Klondike. He just said, okay, I've got to be the calm one. And we need to do that to ourselves when we're in a fearful situation and we don't even understand our fear, to just go, to be patient with ourselves and go, okay, take it one step at a time, go slow, encourage, think positive, those sort of things. And so learning how to do that for Klondike gives a life lesson on how we can do that for others and for ourselves.
Yeah.
I have to say that my favorite part of researching this book, even though we didn't end up using it, was going to a puppy class at Canine Companions and getting to meet a bunch of future guide dogs who were like 8 weeks old. I was in heaven. I'm like, this is work. I love it.
Really?
Well, not guide dogs, but companion dogs. But yeah,
companion dogs.
Canine Companions deals with a variety of other kinds of disabilities, not blindness, but they have a number of campuses around the country. So Keri got to go to the one in San Diego, right?
Yeah, I went to the one in San Diego, and they're trained for all sorts of different people. You're right. It's not guide dogs, service dogs.
But she got to play with the puppies, which is of course always a good thing.
Yeah,
it's one of the great success stories under the rubric of trans-species connections, isn't it? That between human beings and dogs. In fact,
sure,
there really isn't anything like it that I can think of. We are very close to cats, but I don't think that anyone would say that cats are as sociable as dogs. We're very close to horses, but it's not the same thing.
No,
dogs have, over the 20,000 years that they've been with us, they have gotten rid of their adult stage and sort of focus themselves on us. They do actually care about our emotions, about our state of mind. When we get in trouble, they get distressed. When we get in, we had a dog, a really beautiful sheepdog, who, if two members of the family were getting into fights, and in my family that happened all the time, that dog would get in between the two combatants, or the two would-be combatants.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, Michael, looking at dogs in general, looking at the kind of dogs that you've lived with, they are very special, almost uncanny animals if taken as a whole, aren't they? That they are a real, an opportunity for us in that sense, to have a relationship like this.
Well, I believe very firmly that what people say about dogs is true, that dogs love unconditionally. I think that's absolutely true, unless they're just so traumatized by something that we do to them that they turn off that love. We actually had a dog that we adopted that was somewhat like that until we broke through that barrier. But what I also think is that dogs don't trust unconditionally. But the difference between dogs and people is that dogs, generally speaking, are open to trust. They want people to be the team leader. They want to know rules. They want to know what you expect of them. And those are all things that you need to teach in a positive way. You don't do it by punishing the dog when they don't do something the way you want. You reward the dog and you praise the dog when they do something right. They're bright. They catch on to that.
Really? Yes.
And they want to be the teammate, and they want you to be the team leader. And it's just so unfortunate that most people with pet dogs don't understand that. One of the things I learned when we were living up in San Rafael, working at guide dogs, and then for years after, just continuing to speak, we were like a mile from one of the most well-known humane societies, Marin Humane Society in the world. And one of the things that they constantly teach people is when you go to a class and you're taking your dog for training, 90% of the training is human training, not dog training. And there's so much value and so much truth to that.
We'll return to the musical Innertube in just a minute, but first, this soothing musical interlude.
Keri Wyatt Kint is the author of 12 books and the co-author of 13 titles. She's the founder of A Powerful Story, a company that provides editing, collaborative writing, ghostwriting, and assisted self-publishing services. She's the author of the Substack newsletter Welcoming and Wandering, which explores hospitality and travel as spiritual practices.
Mike Hingson attended the University of California, Irvine, graduating with honors and received a master's degree in physics. On September 11th, 2001, Mike, a blind man, escaped the World Trade Center by walking down 78 flights of stairs with his guide dog, Roselle. He is the Chief Vision Officer for Accessibe, a company that creates products to make websites more accessible to people with disabilities, and is also the National Federation of the Blind's ambassador for its National Braille Literacy campaign.
Keri's website is Keri, Keri, Wyatt, Wyatt, Kent, KENT.com.
Mike's website is Michael, MichaelHingson.com.
And now we return to the musical Innertube, already in progress. As you said, Mike, we're colored with what will happen. Like yesterday, for example, the local pool where I have a membership has, at the end of the season, a dog dip where they open the pool and everybody can bring their dogs, and the dogs do a swim for about an hour. And all of the people who go to the pool love this and look forward to it every year. So before we were going to go yesterday, I looked at our dog, Coco, who is a German Shepherd Collie mix, and she's just sitting there. And I'm thinking to myself, in about 20 minutes, you'll be in a pool and having fun. But right now, you have no idea that that's going to happen. But I, as a human, do. So what is the thing that dogs teach us about not worrying about the future, about being in the moment a little more than we usually are?
Well, let's use that example. Some people may have dogs that they view as not being as sociable as other dogs, and they're going to worry about, when I take my dog to the pool, how's my dog going to behave in the pool? What's my dog going to do with all the other dogs? And worry about so many things that probably will never come to pass, which is part of the whole thing that we talk about with fear. The reality is we get afraid of everything, and well over 90% of the things that we're afraid of are never going to come to pass anyway. But we worry about, how's that dog going to behave? What's going to happen? Rather than expressing confidence, rather than encouraging the dog, and over time, making sure that you train dogs to be more of a sociable and not an antagonistic animal. And those are things that you can teach. Dogs do take on oftentimes the characteristics of the people they live with. And so when you've got a pretty obnoxious dog, you got to wonder about the person that owns the dog. but the reality is that dogs really do live in the moment, and there's so much more to learn about that. You, I assume, took Coco to the pool and you didn't worry about it or much, and it all went really well. But other people might have concerns, and the dogs can sense that. And when they do, they're going to act out in some ways where they don't need to.
I think working on this book, and Mike and I had a lot of great conversations about mindfulness and living in the moment and how that can help us when we're feeling afraid. Because a lot of times our fear is either we're living in the future worrying about what's going to happen, or we're living in the past and regretting what happened before. But when we're in the moment, then we are in a place where much of the fear that we live with every day isn't there. And so, focusing on what we're doing in the moment and how dogs do that. When a dog is guiding, it's not thinking, oh, I wonder if I'm going to have a treat later, or, I wonder, if somebody's going to bother us. They just are in the moment, dialed in. What's in front of me? What do I have to deal with? How do I keep my handler safe? And we can learn from that to just, hey, tomorrow will take care of itself. And I need to not worry by focusing on the moment.
One of the things that I still do, when I give a speech, I like to record it so I can go back and listen to it. And when people say, why do you do that? I used to always say, I'm my own worst critic. And I realized literally over the last year in thinking about it, wrong thing to say. That's negative. And what I really have learned to say is, I'm my own best teacher. And it's such a difference when you look at it in a positive way. And working with dogs, it's all about, or ought to be all about, dealing with things in a positive way. When the guide dogs are being trained, they're encouraged with food rewards and then using a device called a clicker. A clicker is a little thing that you carry, and when you push it, it clicks. And the purpose of the clicker is to be a demarcation. When the dog does something you want the dog to do, if you immediately click and then follow it up with a food reward, they very quickly learn that the sound of the clicker means, oh, I did it right. That's great. And that's exactly what you want to do. You don't want to use negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement works a whole lot better.
Michael, I'm wondering.
And the reality is that the training of guide dogs has become much more efficient. Guide dogs typically are now trained in 3, maybe 4 months. It used to be 6 months or more because of that. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No, don't be sorry. I never have much to say. No, I'm thinking you've had a long career with these dogs. They've trained you. You've trained them. Do you think you're a better person for it?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I think that the real reason for that is the dogs aren't pretentious, right? And I think that the reality is...
That's such a good point. Dogs can't have airs.
Yeah.
Dogs can't condescend.
Right.
They can't. That's one of the things I like about dogs is they can't treat you like you were yesterday's garbage. I mean, you're like,
right.
Human beings could do that.
We do leave that up to cats to do that.
I was just going to say, cats, on the other hand,
Yeah.
but dogs are not pretentious, and that's important. And again, that's part of the lessons of Live Like a Guide Dog, is that there's so much that we can learn. I tell people all the time, I've learned so much more about teamwork, trust, leadership, and so on from working with 8 guide dogs and my wife's service dog, who was actually the mother of my 7th guide dog. But I've learned so much more about teamwork, trust, leadership, and so on from working with these dogs than I've ever learned from Tony Robbins, Ken Blanchard, and all those guys, because it's all absolutely personal and real, working with a dog in a way that it isn't when you're just talking about it with other people.
I love what Mike said, that instead of being his own worst critic, he's his own best teacher. And I think that is a key right there to not being fearful. If you're always like, oh, I'm probably going to mess this up. I know I did it bad. I could do it bad again. Just say, what have I learned? And what can I do better in the future? I go forward in a positive direction. And that alone can keep us from, we're not afraid of failing. We're eager to learn. And the same thing can happen in both those situations.
And it's not easy to adopt that mindset, because we're so used to not adopting that mindset.
Right.
But the reality is, when we learn to do that and we are able to put it into practice, it makes such a difference in our lives, because then you realize there's no such thing as failure. There are things like, oh, that didn't work out the way I expected it to. But then the next thing you logically learn to do is to go, why? Or even when something works out really well, could I have done it better? And maybe the answer is no, I did it as well as I could possibly do it. But you really look at that and you learn to analyze those things. And if the more you practice it, the better it becomes. And those are things that you literally can learn in a snap to be able to make the right decision. But it takes practice to do that, and it takes effort.
There's another character in the book that we haven't mentioned. There's Mike and his guide dogs, and of course Mike's late wife Karen. and all of the other people that have helped out Mike, all of the employers and the people at the Federation for the Blind and the guide dogs. But there is another important character in there, and that is God.
Mm-hmm.
And he's brought up a number of times, but not in a religious way, but more in a spiritual way, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think that it's important to do that because what we don't want people to say is, "Oh, this book it represents one religion." It does represent God, so atheists, sorry, but the reality is that God is with us, and you can define God however you want, but God is there, and we do want to recognize the whole concept of faith and God and how all of that works together and helps us if we choose to let it. My favorite example of dealing with God is still Trivial Pursuit. How many times do you play the game Trivial Pursuit? Somebody asks a question and instantly you think of an answer, but then you go, no, that was too easy. It can't be it. You overthink it. Suddenly you come up with a different answer, and that's the answer you give. But the reality is that the correct answer was the first one that you thought of that you decided not to use. That happens so often because we don't listen to that inner voice like we should.
The parallels between a guide dog and his handler and and human beings and God, if we are open to it, is that God is not a punishing God. God is, Mike and I believe anyway, that God, if we listen to the voice that is inside of us, that God can speak to us and communicate with us and help us, and we can work together with God to make the world a better place. Like, that's kind of the message of it. And then there's so many beautiful parallels between the relationship of a dog and a human, especially a working dog, and then, human beings and the Creator.
God gave us free will. God gave us choice. And so we can choose to ignore all that Keri just said, but we're not better for it if we do. We're the better for it if we really listen to God, if we try to understand and follow the teachings and listen to all those inner nudges that we're given on a regular basis. We're much better for it.
So, Michael, following on my earlier question about whether dogs have made you a better person, I imagine you were a person of faith all along, but do you think that dogs have made God more real for you?
Oh, I think so. But I think, again, that is a question that is answered because I've thought about it, and I've allowed myself to be very self-analytical and look to communicate with God and learned. And what I've learned, of course, is the big problem with prayers is we're always telling God what we want. But I thought that we were supposed to believe that God is that omniscient creature. And so God knows what we want already. The issue is, are we learning to listen to get what we need, to get what we desire? And so for me, learning to work with a dog, another one of God's creatures, is such an awesome thing because they don't, dogs don't speak the same language that we do, but they figure us out as we need to learn to figure them out. And when that process works and we truly become a bonded, well-running team, there's nothing better.
And Don will remember with me when we took our catechism courses in Catholic school, one of the ways of thinking about God that were suggested to us is that God is always in the present. That for God, too, there's not a past or a future. There's a now without beginning or end, and God's always there, and that God is all apt for that reason, that God doesn't have to worry. God has no worries, but God is right there in the present, much like, the dogs.
Yeah. And Mike, God gave us dogs, but he also gave us cats. So could you be really, would you tell him how pissed off we are next time you talk to God?
Nah, I can't really do that too much because I have a rescue cat that we got in 2015, and she is still with me, and she sleeps with me. So, she's adopted me and she's decided I'm okay. So that's okay. And we've learned to communicate with each other. Whenever she wants to eat, she comes and yells at me or pushes up against me until I go in and pet her while she eats. So she's trained me. But we've worked out a deal because I've told her you can do that once during the night, but I'm only going to get up once during the night. And I guess she's understood that because she'll wake me up sometime, usually between 1 and 3 in the morning. I go over and I pet her, but she leaves me alone for the rest of the night. So that works out pretty well.
Oh, okay. So once again, it's a case of we train dogs, but cats train us.
Precisely.
Look, dogs have masters, cats have staff. There's no way to get around it.
Oh my goodness.
So great.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, Mike and Keri, thanks for being on with us today and talking about the new book. Once again, the book is Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs, and his cats too, about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. You guys, it's a terrific book, and anybody who picks it up will be much the better after reading.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I would also say that anyone who reads it, we would be very grateful if you would then go to Amazon or wherever and review it. And of course, say nice things about it, because that will help other people read it, and it will show the publisher and the world that it's a book that people read and that they like. So we really appreciate you taking the time to review the book.
All right. Thanks, guys, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.